Are you sick of just going through the motions of your day-to-day life, just surviving? We really get it, and we want to help you break free to a more vibrant, resilient, and thriving life. I'm Chloe Urban, the co-director of the La Chiara Method and your podcast co-host, and I'm thrilled to invite you to our free masterclass, From Surviving to Thriving, Unravel Your Trauma and Embrace Your True Potential. In this powerful session, we dive into the key areas that keep you stuck. We explore why perfectionism and overwhelm are so hard to shake, how trauma silently shapes your daily life, and why change feels so difficult to achieve. Plus, we show you how to unlock the power of your survival brain and explore the possibilities that energy medicine brings for real, sustainable healing and transformation. To sign up, go to the lachiaramethod.com/masterclass. That link is also in the show notes. We have some exciting news. In addition to the episode format we've been sharing thus far on the podcast that features healing sessions with commentary afterwards, we will now be adding interviews to the mix. This episode will be our first of many interviews and inspiring conversations we will have with others doing amazing work in the world. Welcome to the Activate Change podcast, where transformation is just a conversation away. Some episodes of this podcast offer an intimate front row seat to an authentic and unscripted personal healing session with renowned healer and creator of the La Chiara Method, Gabriele La Chiara. Our incredibly generous and courageous guests explore their genuine struggles, longings, and deepest desires in these sessions. And we, as listeners, have the honor and privilege to witness their sacred and profound healing journeys. As you listen, we invite you to receive as well, feeling into where the healing and insights that transpire might spark transformation in your own life. And stay tuned until the end because I, Chloe Faith Urban, will discuss the session and share a skill or framework that Gabriele used, which you can apply to your own personal healing. And because of the La Chiara Method's deep commitment to collaboration and perpetual learning, some episodes will highlight conversations with other thought leaders, healers, and activists on the path to bring healing, liberation, and true equality to the world. This podcast does contain adult language and content, so if you have little ones around you, you may want to use headphones. In this episode, I, Chloe, am so honored to share with you an interview I did in 2019 with Dr. Richard Schwartz, who's the founder of Internal Family Systems, also known as IFS. I'm thrilled to share this particular conversation because IFS has been an incredibly helpful therapy model for me in my own healing journey. I worked with an IFS therapist for multiple years, and it helped me tremendously in my trauma healing journey, specifically around sexual abuse, my challenges with navigating betrayal and relationship, and growing up in an alcoholic family. I can honestly say I would not be who I am today without IFS. I've really enjoyed revisiting my conversation with Dr. Richard Schwartz. Reflecting on it has highlighted how much I've grown and changed since then. While I might ask different questions today, I believe there is tremendous value in this interview for everyone. Before we dive into the conversation, here's just a little bit more about Dr. Richard Schwartz. Dr. Schwartz began his career as a systemic family therapist and an academic. Grounded in systems thinking, Dr. Schwartz developed Internal Family Systems, IFS, in response to clients' descriptions of various parts within themselves. He focused on the relationships among these parts and noticed that there were systemic patterns to the way they were organized across clients. He also found that when clients' parts felt safe and were allowed to relax, the clients would experience spontaneously the qualities of confidence, openness, and compassion that Dr. Schwartz came to call the self. He found that when in the state of self, clients would know how to heal their parts. In 2000, he founded the Center for Self-Leadership, now known as the IFS Institute, which provides IFS training for professionals and international learning opportunities for those exploring personal growth through IFS. A featured speaker for national professional organizations, Dr. Schwartz has published many books and over 50 articles about IFS. To find out more, go to ifs-institute.com. You can also find that link in the show notes. Without further ado, let's dive in. I'm so thrilled to welcome you here today with us, Richard. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here, Chloe. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So we can just dive right into what is IFS and how does it help people who have dealt with trauma?
Well, it, as my bio suggested, has primarily been the method of psychotherapy, but it's expanding into a lot of different realms now. So it's used increasingly in medicine and in bringing it to education and spirituality and a lot of other areas, conflict resolution, do a training in that too. So, but yeah, it began as a method of psychotherapy.
And can you describe a little bit of what actually like parts work is? What is our internal family system and how might we kind of access that within us?
Yeah, well, the basic assumption is that we're all multiple personalities in the sense that we all have what I call parts, which is what my clients called them when I was working with them in the early 80s. And unlike other models that work with parts, my belief is that it's the natural state of the mind to be multiple that way. And that people who have what used to be called multiple personality disorder, or now it's called DID, aren't any different from any of us, except that because of the horrific trauma they suffered, theirs got blown apart much more. But the fact that we all have these full range inner personalities is just the natural state. And as we go through life, the slings and arrows force them out of their naturally valuable roles into often extreme and sometimes damaging roles. And they're frozen in time back in the traumas that you suffered and think that you're still quite young and they need to protect you in the way they did then, which at this point is becoming just a problem.
Beautiful. And really these parts are created when something traumatic happens or some sort of incident. Is that what you're finding?
No, actually, that's been the assumption, that the mind is naturally unitary and that trauma fragments it, splits it off into these parts. But my position is different. It's that the parts are there from birth, either manifest or dormant. They're all valuable, but trauma forces them into roles that they're not designed to do and that can be quite extreme. It's a very different paradigm than to say that these are signs of pathology, which is what the trauma approach has basically been saying.
So basically, someone who experiences a trauma, say at 4 years old, then that young part of them, it goes into kind of an exiled state and is afraid and all the trauma impacts it. And then that creates the kind of rift in our experience.
Yeah, that's sort of it. Yeah, if we had a trauma when we were 4, then the most vulnerable parts of us, the often referred to as inner children, get hurt the most by whatever betrayal or rage came at you or whatever the trauma was. And before the trauma happened, they were these happy, delightful, playful, loving inner children. But after the trauma and they become hurt, they can keep us frozen in that time and they can make it hard for us to function. And so we don't want anything to do with them after this. And so we lock them away. I call them the exiles. And most traumatized people have a lot of exiles and have been thinking that was just the memories, sensations, emotions, and beliefs from the traumas that they're trying to stay away from, not realizing they're actually locking up some of their most precious qualities because those parts have gotten hurt. And then once you get a lot of exiles, other parts have to keep them locked up, and they have to keep the world from touching them or triggering them. And so then you have a bunch of other parts who are forced into these protective roles. So we call those protective parts. And so that's the way many, not just trauma survivors, but most of us have a bunch of exiles, and we have a bunch of protectors that are running our lives.
Yeah.
And still think we're 4 years old.
Right. And the different types of protectors, can you speak to those a little bit and explain how that might impact our life?
Yeah. So we need, once we get a lot of exiles, we need a way to manage our external lives so that the exiles never get triggered, and to keep them contained. And so there are parts whose job it is to scan for danger and become hypervigilant, and other parts try to control our relationships so no one gets too close, or people we depend on don't get too distant, or control our appearance so that we behave and look good and don't get rejected, or control our performance so that we get a lot of accolades to counter the worthlessness that the exiles feel, and so on. So these we call managers. They're trying to manage our lives, both so that nothing hurts the exiles and you don't get triggered, but also so that they don't escape. Some of these managers can numb your body so you don't feel enough to ever get triggered, for example. And then, despite their best efforts of those what in traditional therapies are called the defenses, the world has a way of triggering exiles. And when that happens, it's like a big emergency. And so there's another set of parts who immediately go into action to put out the fire, put out the flames of emotion that are coming out of exile, that are threatening to kill you or surround or overwhelm you. And so we call those parts firefighters. In contrast to the manager protectors, they're very impulsive and reactive, and they don't care about the consequences. And so most of us have both managers and firefighters if we have a lot of exiles.
Yeah. And you'll see like addiction and stuff like that coming from those firefighter parts.
Yeah, at least initially. So, for example, if I had a client who, when he felt slighted, went to a bar and got drunk, then that would be a firefighter reaction to the exile feeling hurt. I've got to get out of that hurt state right now, and I'm going to get drunk to do it. But let's say after a while he realizes that if he stays drunk most of the time, he never feels the slight in the first place. So the drinking has moved from being a firefighter activity to being a manager activity.
Oh, got it.
Both of which would constitute as an addiction. But it's just the point in the sequence. Is it before the exile gets triggered or after? Is it preventative or is it reactive?
Beautiful. And I could see that also even weaving in with someone who says has severe anxiety, like maybe the firefighter would be like an anxiety attack almost. Exactly. And then the kind of underlying anxiety that's just sort of there all the time might be more to help you manage. Is that?
Exactly. That's the same distinction. The chronic anxiety is a manager, and then the panic attack is the firefighter.
So interesting. I hadn't quite thought of that way. This retreat, we're really focused on how essence heals, like that there's a place in us, experience of ourselves that actually is at the source of all healing that is possible. And in IFS, I know that's called self energy. Can you speak to self energy and how, when we really tap into self energy, so much can shift for us?
Yeah. So we've talked so far about all these parts, but it turns out that just beneath their surface is this essence that you're referring to, that many spiritual traditions allude to, that does know how to heal us and knows how to heal internally and externally in terms of external relationships also, and can't be damaged and contains these wonderful qualities we call the 8 C's. So when you access this place, you feel calm, confident, curious, also compassion, and then clarity, connectedness, courage, and creativity. Those are the qualities that are most salient to healing things. And I stumbled into this because back in the day, this goes back almost 4 decades now, and I was messing around with people who had described these parts to me, and I, as a family therapist, was trying to get them to get along better with their parts. And as I would try to have them have these dialogues inside, they would start to talk to maybe the critic, and I was hoping that they could actually listen to it and try to help it calm down and change. But suddenly they'd be furious with the critic. As a family therapist, that reminded me of family sessions where I might be having a teenage girl talk to her critical mother, and suddenly she's furious with the mother and everything breaks down. And I was taught to look around and see if somebody isn't covertly siding with the girl against the mother. And you might notice the father is cueing her that he disagrees with the mother too. And we were taught to get him to step back out of her line of vision and create a better boundary between the mother and the daughter. So as I'm doing this with my clients, I'm thinking maybe some other part is jumping in and interfering. That's why the girl is getting so angry at the critic. And I said, could you see if the one who's angry at the critic could just step back in there? Basically the same thing I was doing in these external systems. And my clients, to my amazement, said, okay, it did. And then I'd say, okay, now how do you feel toward it? And it would be one of those C words. I feel curious about it. I want to get to know it. I feel sorry for it. I want to help it, compassion, or some version of that. And when I would ask clients, now, what part of you is that? Because that's great. Let's keep that around. They'd say, that's really not a part like these others. That's me. That's myself. I came to call that the self. And as I did it with other clients, over and over, I was just amazed that by simply getting a certain number of parts, not a certain number, but some parts to open space inside, the same person popped out in different clients and knew how to relate to their parts in a healing way. I would get out of the way and the client would just take over. And then if I was to work with this kid and her boyfriend, maybe, if I could access that place in each of them and have them talk from that place, they would heal their own relationship. So anyway, that's become sort of the big deal in this model, the big discovery, that's in there and that it can't be damaged, and that it can be actually, with most people, can be accessed quite quickly. So you don't have to meditate 20 years to get there.
Right. In fact, if you get pretty good at it, you can sit and tune in and find it pretty quickly, or that's what I found at least.
It's quite concrete. You can really get a felt sense of when you're there and when you're not. And when you're not, you just ask your parts to trust you more and open more space.
Yeah. I'm curious about how, once we discover these wounded parts of ourselves or traumatized parts of ourselves, I know there's a process called unburdening. Can you speak to unburdening a little bit and how that actually can help us move on and stay and get out of the stuck place?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So as I was doing all this, and clients began talking about these hurt young parts of them, I would try to get to those hurt parts. I would try to have client's self go, and they would see a little girl, maybe, or a little boy, and I would try to get them to get close to that exile. And often they could, and the little child part, the image anyway, would feel better as they were comforting that part. And as a family therapist, I thought, okay, this is great. This is what needs to happen, because that's what I was doing with families, was trying to get parents to be comforting to their kids and instead of yelling at them. But then I'd come back the next session and the child was in as bad shape as it was the time before. And so at first I got discouraged, but then I got curious and tried to find out what is it that's needed to make this more permanent. And at that point, these parts started talking about these extreme beliefs and emotions that were driving them. And they could actually describe the energy of those things as something that was stuck to their bodies or inside their bodies and didn't belong to them, but had a tremendous impact, like a virus, in terms of how they thought and saw the world and how they operated in the inner world. And so I became curious about these things and tried to convince parts to just take them out of their bodies or off their bodies. And when they did, the part would immediately transform and would, from my point of view, become what it was designed to be. It would be, they'd transform into their naturally valuable states. Then I thought, okay, that's the answer. And so, but then I'd come back and the part with the burdens, what I call the burdens now, those energies, those extreme beliefs and emotions would be back inside the part, and the part would be as extreme as ever. So again, it would be this kind of trial and error experimenting that led us to realize that to really release these burdens, these parts need a couple things. One is they need for you, Chloe, your part would need for you to get what happened to it and how bad that was when it got hurt, often when you were a child. So you become a compassionate witness to your own history. And once the part feels like you really get it, that's still not quite enough because most of these parts are still frozen back in those scenes. So then I would have you, the self that I'm talking about, enter the scene in your mind and be there for that girl in the way she needed somebody at the time and do whatever she needed back there until she was ready to come with you into the present or into a fantasy nice place. And then once all that was complete, in answering the question, ask this part if it's ready to unload the feelings and beliefs it got back there, the answer would be yes. And we could send those out often, again, through trial and error to the elements, light, yeah, water, fire, wind, earth, anything else. Have the light come in, have it shine on this little girl, sort of let all that go into the light until it's all out of the system, until it's all out of her body. And then we can have the light bring in qualities that she needs too, or invite qualities to fill up the space the burdens took. And that would stick. That would be a complete healing. And then we could invite all the protectors in to see that they didn't need to do this anymore because she wasn't vulnerable anymore. And then we could help them into new roles. So that's basically, it's a long answer to your question.
No, I love it.
Taking a quick minute to tell you about a course we have coming up. Imagine waking up every day feeling more vibrantly you, deeply understood and supported, and equipped with tools to help when things get rocky. Not just surviving your days, but truly thriving. That vision is not just a dream, it's within your reach. Our From Surviving to Thriving 10-week course teaches you everything you need to uplevel your life and your relationships. Over 10 weeks, you'll be with us in an intimate, mutually supportive, sacred learning space with a community that sees and supports you. And the best part? After completing the course, you'll gain lifetime access to our community of peer-to-peer coaches. You'll also be able to join us any other time we ever do the course. Think of it as the gift that keeps on giving. Free support whenever you need it. We're committed to making this transformative journey as accessible as possible, so we're offering flexible payment options starting at just $68 a month. Plus, if you want to get certified in the La Chiara method as a radical life coach, you can take From Surviving to Thriving and bundle it with our Level 2 certification program and save an additional 10% off. Simply use the code BUNDLE at checkout. For more information on the course, you can go to lachiaramethod.com/thrive, and I will also make sure that link is in the show notes. We so hope you'll join us.
You know, I weave a little bit of IFS into my work sometimes because it's just so obvious, like there's a really young part that needs something or something kicks in and it's just like, okay, we're going to journey in a little bit and see what's going on. And what I've been finding, which is just so fascinating, and really what you're talking about here, is that you can go in and so much of the energy, beliefs, and things actually don't even belong to the person at all, like you were saying. And in fact, I've even been seeing how even like some illnesses come in, you know, it might be someone uses, you even use the word virus, but I've been finding like, oh, someone actually brought in a virus at that moment to help protect themselves. So almost like these, it's almost like people are bringing in hostile energies as protectors. Have you found that some protectors or some parts that feel like parts don't actually belong to the person?
Yeah, this is something I don't talk about all the time.
Yeah.
I want to still.
I knew. I was like, this is an edgy question, but I'm just going to ask it anyways because I'm so fascinated by it.
I want IFS to be accepted in the mainstream.
I know. These aren't very mainstream listeners, so don't worry.
Just tell them not to spread the word too far.
Okay.
Yes, we do run into things that clearly are not parts, and when approached, we'll acknowledge that they don't belong inside the person, that they might say they belong in there, but they aren't native to the person. And that unlike some of these other burdens that I've talked about, these things have a kind of life of their own. And so we call them unattached burdens because they're not attached to a part, they're freestanding. And they're often very nasty. They just want to do damage, either to damage the person or to make the person hurt others. And other systems, as you know, I looked into that because I had no clue about what these were initially. Call them entities or a variety of names for that. Yeah, most of the shamanic traditions run into this too. Right. And so what we've found, and I co-authored a second edition of my original book recently, and I had a chapter called The Laws of Inner Physics. And one of the most important laws is that there's nothing inside of anybody that can hurt them if they're not afraid of it. If we were doing work and you ran into one of these things, even if you were terrified of it initially, and even if it's had a lot of power over you in your life, if I could get you into self relative to it, it would have no power. It would still try to scare you and take over. You would have total power over it. And then at some point, we just tell it doesn't belong inside of you, and we send it off to the light usually. And it has no choice. It just has to leave.
Right. I mean, once you're in that self, it's like, what is it even able to attach to? Because you're there in essence full. It's really so interesting. And it brings me into this curiosity about how, and I was reading a little bit about some of the studies that have been done with rheumatoid arthritis and stuff like that. How do you see IFS and, you know, actual medical conditions, chronic illness, disease, pain in the body? How do you see them working together? How does IFS actually help with that sort of thing?
Yeah, so there is often an interaction between parts and disease. Not always, you know, right. Viruses do exist and they'll make you sick. And
right.
Genetic conditions will create various problems, but we all carry viruses, and we all have genetic flaws, genetic defects, and our parts get wind of those, and then they can start to use them for their own purposes if they want to, somewhat along the lines of what you were talking about earlier. So, you know, I have genetic propensity for asthma and for migraine headaches. And it used to be that if a part wanted to take me out, it would push the migraine button and I'd have a big headache. And, you know, I just couldn't function. But then after I healed the stuff that it was trying to protect me, so it never didn't need to push that button anymore, my migraines went away. And also I would say that, you know, if I'm in a really dusty room, I'll start to have an asthma attack. It's got nothing to do with my parts. It's just because the room is dusty.
Right, right.
But if a part wants to take me out, it knows it can push the asthma button too. So, well, often in the arthritis study you mentioned, we would have clients, and these were mainly Irish Catholic, Boston mothers who had never been in therapy and had these massive caretaking parts that never let them take care of themselves. And we would have them focus on the pain of the arthritis and get curious about it, ask questions of the pain. And the parts who were using the pain, pressing that button, would answer the questions. And mainly they would talk about how they hated the fact that they never took care of themselves. And they were going to punish them or they were going to cripple them because of that. As we worked that out, the arthritis got much, much better as measured by blinded physicians. It was a very nice study published in the Journal of Rheumatology.
Wow, I love that.
Yeah, so that's my take on parts in medicine.
It's just so interesting. That makes so much sense. I even just had the flu last week, but it wasn't really like the flu. I just was in a lot of pain and I was like, what is going on? And I was like, oh, I'm avoiding something. Like there's a part in here that's hurt and I'm avoiding looking at it. So my protector's coming in and using pain to distract me so I don't have to go there, right? And being like, oh, I can actually choose not to be taken down, like bring myself back into self, figure out what's going on, what that younger part needs. And it went away like that. And just so cool to see when we go really inward and actually heal what needs to be healed, how much can shift in our own bodies and experiences. And thank you for sharing. I know people are here and they're listening and, some of this might feel abstract to some people. How can we actually help the people at home who say are dealing with chronic illness, pain, depression, anxiety? How can they just simply for themselves, even if they don't have an IFS therapist, how can they begin to kind of use this knowledge to create shifts for themselves?
Yeah, well, the main way is sort of what you did, with your pain, which is to start by just getting curious. And, mindfulness is sort of like that, separating from whatever it is, the phenomena, and being open to it rather than hating it or trying to get rid of it. And start asking a few questions and waiting for an answer. Don't think of the answer. And whatever parts are involved will often start answering, which initially can freak people out. But they're themselves.
Right.
But as you start getting these answers, then you'll learn much more about how the part is trying to protect you. And as you learn about that, you can extend it some appreciation for at least trying. And you can also learn about how old it thinks you are, because most of them think you're quite young still. And as you update it, that helps parts relax very quickly often. And you can learn about what it's trying to protect, which is often one of these exiles. And then you should go see an IFS therapist, because
right. It's so much help. So helpful.
It's tough to go to exiles by yourself, basically.
Right.
And to heal many syndromes, you have to heal the exile that's beneath it.
Right.
But just the process of getting to know your protectors and honoring them and reminding them that you're not a little kid can ease a lot of symptoms very quickly.
I was so curious too, listening to as I was preparing, and you were talking about how the external world, people will come into your sphere that kind of either are, say, showing their vulnerability, which would be, scary to see for somebody who's really afraid of their exile parts, or who are more of that protector, intense energy in the world. Can you explain that just a little bit? I was having some serious gears turning in my head that I'm happy to share in a minute, but can you speak about that a little bit and how we can use this awareness and actually, step into more consciousness with people around us?
Well, yeah. As I said earlier, most people are led by various protectors and don't have a lot of access to self in the beginning. But if you know that, then you don't react to a person when they're obnoxious. You say, okay, there's that part of them that just took over, that's protecting them for some reason. And it's like you have x-ray vision. You can see the pain that's driving it. And so you don't get as reactive to people around you. I don't know if that's what you were asking about, but that's one of the benefits of thinking this way.
Yeah. Yes, that. And well, just as an example, I was listening to some of this and I was noticing in my own self how easy it is for me to actually go right to the exiles. But a lot of times it's more challenging to find my protector parts, almost because they scare me more than the exiles do. And I find out in the world, vulnerability doesn't scare me at all. Or like someone who's more of like a trauma, acting as if they're a traumatized little child in some way, that doesn't disgust me. That doesn't like make me want to run for the hills. But when someone gets in a really sharp, intense kind of like protector firefighter intensity, that's when I'm really freaked out. So I was just having that awareness of like, oh, I can go right to the exile, but I have trouble actually not managing, but speaking to those protectors more. Do you find that happens with people, or?
Yeah, sure. And if you'd like, we could do a little piece of work in the time we have left.
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah. So do you want to try to find a protector, or
Sure.
do you want to think of a situation like that? Where do you want to start?
Sure, we can find a protector. I have a lot of them. So yes. And for people watching, I feel like this will just be so helpful for you to be able to see how the model works, so that when you go to do your home kind of play with yourself, you can actually see what might come up or how it might look for you. So yes, let's go in.
Okay. So think of a part you'd like to start with.
I have a part that's very like kind of likes to attack or get really, really critical and kind of mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
So focus on that one and find it in your body, around your body.
It's over my right shoulder.
And as you notice it there, how do you feel toward it?
At first, I feel a little scared, or a part of me feels a little scared. And then I can sink in a little bit deeper and find just the curiosity and compassion for it.
Yeah. So ask the scared one to give us some space.
Yeah.
So we're just going to get to know this one. We're not going to give it more power. We're just going to see what it wants you to know about itself.
Yeah.
So you're feeling curious about it?
Yep.
All right. So just follow your curiosity and ask what it wants you to know about itself. We'll start there. And don't think of the answer, Chloe. Just wait for an answer to come.
Great.
From that place around your body.
Great. Can you ask the question again?
Yeah. What does it want you to know about itself?
Got it.
Just wait for that answer.
I'm on my own and no one will protect me.
Okay. So how do you feel toward it as you hear that?
I can feel, I can feel a real compassion, sort of like, oh, that's really hard.
Now let it know. You get that. You have compassion for it. And you can ask it what it's afraid would happen if it didn't get mean sometimes and lash out.
Mm-hmm. It feels like it would feels almost like it would it's saying it would get lost in like an emotional wave, almost like it's afraid it's just going to get lost in emotion forever.
And what kind of emotion is it afraid to get lost in?
Grief, shame, and I can feel the smaller part coming in and being like icky feelings, like it's kind of like almost dirtiness. I don't know how to describe that
Yeah.
other than that, but yeah.
Okay. All right. So it's afraid it would become sort of drowned in those feelings.
Exactly.
Or is it afraid of you being drowned in those feelings? Just get a sense of that.
It's afraid that I will be drowned in those feelings.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Does this make sense to you, Chloe?
Yeah.
So let it know you get that. And you really see how hard it's trying to protect you from that, and see how it reacts to your appreciation.
It's sort of had a sigh of relief.
Good.
Yeah. Like almost sat down in a chair and was like, oh, I don't have to work so hard anymore somehow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of that, ask it how old it thinks you are.
Mm-hmm.
And just wait for a number to come back.
4.
All right. So let it know you're not 4 anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and that you can handle feelings a lot better than you could when you were 4. And just see how it reacts to that.
Mm-hmm. It's like, again, relieved and also almost like excited, like happy, like, wow, like how can we, like, oh, we get to be like co-partners sort of somehow, like, oh, we get to be, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like excited to partner with me in a different way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So ask it that. If it could trust that you could handle the grief and the shame and the dirtiness or whatever the other one is.
Yeah.
If it could trust you could handle those feelings and it didn't have to do this job, what might it like to do instead inside of you?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that is so funny. Wow. Almost like the words are like it's being my ambassador for connection, like almost somebody who's out there asking for connection instead of pushing it away. It's like almost doing the opposite. Like, how do I invite connection in? And it feels like that would be a job that would really excite it.
And how does that sound to you?
Feels really exciting.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, really moving, actually.
Good.
Yeah.
So let it know that you're going to work to help it trust that it can shift and be this other ambassador.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll stay in touch with it, and you'll keep figuring out what it needs to really trust that it's safe to do that.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So how's that feel now?
Feels really good.
Okay, so thank the part for what it let you know, and tell it you'll keep in touch with it.
Great. And right as at the end, it like linked arms with me on the side. Instead of it being like, "Rah," it was like almost like we're linked in a kind of a fun, friendly way, which felt really sweet.
So you can see it pretty clearly, is that right?
Yeah.
What does it look like?
Feels like almost looking like me. Like it feels almost twin-like energy, but just a little bit different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, does that feel complete for now?
Yeah.
All right, so come on back.
Mm. And now I'm supposed to function? Thank you. That was amazing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was a classic example. It was a really good example of, these protectors are young, or they think you're young, and they were really needed back then. They're not needed in that role anymore. Sometimes all they need is this kind of updating. More often, they'll need you to work with the grief and the shame, heal those parts before they can totally shift into that new role.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really, really amazing.
Saying a huge thank you to Ali Halpert, the incredible musician and songwriter behind the songs featured in this podcast. We've had the privilege of singing some of Ali's powerful songs during our retreats and workshops, which have been such a meaningful and healing addition to our groups. To hear more of Ali's music and learn more, visit Ali's website at alihalpert.com. You can find the link in our show notes.